to today's edition of LATOKEN VCTV, and we are excited to have you guys with us, and we hope that the topic today, which is investments in startups in developing countries, will be an exciting one for you guys. And today with me, we have a distinguished panel from different parts of the developing world. We have Vandana Tolani, we have Pradita Astorina, we have Shreya, and we have Francis. Not forgetting Kartik, and all of them will be contributing to this topic. And we'll be looking at what it is about developing countries that makes startups not as big as those in Silicon Valley. We'll be looking at the challenges and looking at the opportunities for each of these startups in developing countries and how they can grow beyond the limitation placed on them by their environments and whatnot. I think what we'll start with, each of the panel investors will introduce themselves, give us a brief about themselves, and talk to us about what they do. And then we'll go, I think we'll start from the top left of my screen. Vandana, please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what you do.
Hi everyone, this is Vandana from India, and nice to meet you all back here again. I hope I'm audible and visible. I was in Jakarta and Singapore for 15 years in investment banking. I had my own family office fund there. I did a lot of investments there, came back to India, did some investments, went back to advisory. I ran my own firm out of Gurgaon, connected with 200 investors globally. In terms of geographies, we are a global entity and we are sector agnostic. We typically pick up deals from $1 million to $25 million. That's from me.
Okay, great. Thanks for that intro. And we go to the top right of my screen, which is Pradita. Please give us, this is your first time being on VCTV, and thank you for being here, and we hope to see you more. So give us a brief about yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is Pradita Astarina and you can call me Dita. I spent most of my career in investment banking, private equity and venture capital. And previously I spent like 3-4 years in the UK in the private equity fund and also venture capital fund. And 2 years ago, I went back to Jakarta and I joined this fund called CFI, a sector agnostic fund based in Singapore and Jakarta. Actually, we are sector agnostic. I typically invest in the ticket size around 200K to 20 million. And in some leisure time, I also do advisory services, including the fundraising part and, you know, how to structure a deal, something like that. So looking forward to join the conversation. Thank you.
Oh, super. Thank you for that. And let's go to Shreya. You're next.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. And I'm calling in from India, New Delhi. And I work with a venture capital fund called Venture Gurukul Capability Fund. We are a micro fund based out of Delhi, India, and we are looking to invest in startups from all of the developing countries, majorly focusing in Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. We are hoping to invest in all kinds of startups that are digitally transforming everyday life, from transactions to e-commerce, to health, to digital media, how we consume content, everything that is on my phone, my laptop, or on my tablet. And we are hoping to invest with startups at early stage. Our ticket size goes from 100K to about $1 million, pre-series A, series A, and even sometimes seed rounds. And we are looking for all types of exciting opportunities. So entrepreneurs who are listening out there and want to build capability, not just get capital inflow from us, you're more than welcome to give us a shout out and more than welcome to drop in your email on LinkedIn or on my official email. And yeah, looking forward to having this conversation where my target market and my target startups are from. So it will be really nice and interesting to know what challenges startups are facing and what solutions we can come up for them. That's it for me from today.
Wonderful. That's great. I mean, very interesting for a lot of our viewers. They will be excited to hear what you have to say. I think next is Francis. We just want a brief introduction, yourself, what you do, where you're located, and we'll take it from there.
So hi everyone, I'm Francis. I'm actually based here in Manila, Philippines. I'm an angel investor, a tech entrepreneur, and I've done my stint on the M&A side as well. So I've been helping the startup ecosystem here to grow and inviting investors as well over to come and invest in the Philippines.
Great, great, wonderful experience. And last but not least, we go to Kartik, our family member on VCTV. So give us a bit about yourself again.
Thank you so much. Carol, for your records, episode number 53 or 54, I guess. I represent Middle East and I represent a couple of family offices based in the UK with investments into fintech, health tech, and large ticket investments, primarily into Series B and Series C. I also represent a couple of VC houses based out of Dubai and Qatar, investing into Series A funding, pretty much tech sector agnostic, but last few investments have been in health tech, space tech, a couple of space tech investments, fintech, and a lot of edutech investments. Primary ethos of our entire organization, especially the investment route, is not so much so capital multiplication, but rather democratization of reach and democratization of services. And that's what brings us, and that's what makes us unique in this space.
Great, wonderful. Thank you guys for that introduction. And I currently want to just give you a brief of some of the challenges that I researched on and I found out that startups undergo. In my research, I found out that there are significantly a lot of government policies that are not well structured or implemented to support the growth of startups. There are also a lot of legal frameworks that are not in place to help them grow because of the challenges of poverty, among a few other things. Now, what I want to hear from you guys is in a particular region or in a particular country, what factors do you think can drive the growth and development of startups in developing countries? What are the things that the government or the people should look at? What are the values that should drive growth in developing countries? I think we start from Pradita. You're on my left.
Yeah, sure. I think for Indonesian startups, why they are, all the holding company are in Singapore, for example, and then all the Indonesian company as just operating companies, because from the structuring of the deal, it's very beneficial to list in Singapore and have an operating site in Indonesia because of the tax issues. As we know that Indonesian tax regulation is not that, very investor friendly compared to Singapore, and also for, establishing license, for example. When I was in the UK, it's very easy, right, to get some license. And then in Indonesia, it's a bit like a very bureaucratic process. That's the number one thing that I can point out. And the second thing is just like for the labor itself. Like for the labor in the machine learning or like AI or like, deep technology sector, there are still lack of STEM talent here, and then most of them are returnee, right? They're going abroad for studying, and then they spend there for quite some years, and then they return back to Indonesia, and they become, the AI or the machine learning or any like deep tech expert. That's the second thing from the technology or technical point where Indonesian is like compared to Silicon Valley or other developing countries. And the third point is just like we are still learning to build the ecosystem. As you mentioned that the ecosystem is very important for the startups. I couldn't agree more with that. For example, lots of incubators in the UK or in the US, and even in the Singapore and Indonesia, sometimes there are lack of incubators that could grow the startup to much more mature level.
Great, great. So now, would you attribute these inefficiencies to the government's lack of concern or to the people that are in these startups?
Yeah, I think from the government standpoint, they are trying to improve the easiness of doing business in Indonesia. And then recently they just issued this kind of a recent labor law that the Indonesian government is a bit like open to foreigners talent that would like to work in Indonesia, and it creates lots of controversies because it will be threatening for the local talent. But for me, I supported that law a lot because from my experience, like living in a much more developed countries, I think it's not about the competition, right? But it's about like how as a talent you grow better and you become more innovative and not afraid of just going outside your comfort zone. So the government is
Changes.
trying hard.
Okay, that's great to know. That means that there's a significant role the government has to play in regulation,
Exactly.
in education, and
Yes.
making sure that the local manpower is well equipped to be able to
Yeah.
deal with that level of innovation. Okay, thanks for your feedback. Shreya, please give me your own insight on what you think are the values or the policies that need to change to enhance and grow startups in developing countries.
So I can speak from my exposure here in India, and I believe that startups have a lot of potential in developing countries thanks to the fact that there is so much potential and opportunity with the demographic that you have here. But the values and policies that can kind of catapult these startups to becoming unicorns or becoming successful businesses would be the fact that ease of business in most developing countries is very, very low. And that's where it's an aspiring entrepreneur might just leave his persistence and go like, it's too difficult, his taxation laws are different, his laws are different, his working environment is not as friendly as it's supposed to be. And especially when it comes to government, there is a lot of bureaucratism and red tapeism, to get yourself registered, to get yourself licensed. And even specifically for the matter when you're doing tech development and you're developing tech enabled and tech enhanced products, getting your IPAs registered is a long process, and it is quite tiring as well. So I think the governments and the policies should kind of streamline their processes and make this journey of an entrepreneur, especially a tech entrepreneur, easier in terms of validating his product and in terms of registering his product, so that going into market and running beta versions are much quicker and easier. Although with India, we believe that with the Startup India movement and initiative that was launched, well, where the government of India has allocated close to $3 billion to, kind of fund startups at seed round, angel rounds, and pre-series A. While that's happening, we do see a lot of capital availability. But as we say, as we like to position ourselves, helping them bring capability and bring scalability to your products is something that Indian entrepreneurs really do struggle with, like having a good team, not just tech, but like having a good operations team or having a good sales team is not something that you can easily do here. And I believe that if this environment is way more friendlier and is way more conducive of ideas, I think it would be better. And building capability is something that comes through incubators, accelerators, and venture funds like ourselves. And I believe that we do need many more of us here in this ecosystem, so that we can together do better things and have entrepreneurs make an impact, both social and economical, in our countries. So yeah, I believe that
Yeah,
accelerators, incubators, and the government together can kind of bring this digital transformation or transformation.
together.
Yeah.
Yes, I get that. I get that. So you are trying to say that despite the fact that the Indian government has been able to pump a lot of money into the system, that is not quite enough. There needs to be a gap closed with skill and manpower.
Absolutely. Given that we are a country of such a large number and we have so many institutes, but we do lack in job ready, and we do lack in upskilling our employees or upskilling, the junior level, entry level students that you have. So like we have about good number of graduates, but we don't have those graduates that are ready to, just jump in,
Yeah.
the boat in so many words. So yeah, like I think now we need to build our capabilities, and I think we need to build up, upskill ourselves, and that's
Super.
what we need to
Super.
focus on.
I totally agree with you. Without with all the money and all that, without the skills, there will be a significant gap. Kartik, you are definitely well traveled. Space edutech especially. What do you think about this manpower divide? Because Pradita has mentioned the same thing, same as Shreya. And do you think education, manpower skills development, or human capacity development is a significant bottleneck in the development of startups in developing countries?
Absolutely. So I think what makes a startup successful is three: policy, people, and funds. There would be a lot of policy initiatives that the government would take, and I'm sure government in every developing country wants startups, which is indigenization of multiple businesses to be done. But where it fails primarily is building the risk appetite among the startup entrepreneurs as well as from the venture funds. You might even have funds available, but as Shreya said, if there aren't any incubators or if there is a lack of infrastructure in making that fund viable or utilized by the startups, that's going to be one bottleneck. But most important bottleneck is about availability of people who want to take risk, who want to start from the scratch and be a part of an ecosystem that typically works on a 1 is to 10 or 1 is to 8 successes. So that necessarily means people should be able to take risks, the talent pool to make the startup successful, a talent pool to change gears from a startup to a unicorn or from a unicorn to an established business. And migrating mindsets at multiple levels is what most developing countries lack. Along with that, the desire to stay and see a business grow versus a desire to use your education and make money available or make money through any other established means is where the divide comes in from. The reason why we have startups coming in from a lot of other parts of the world and not primarily from developing countries, so India as an exception, I have noticed the last few years, is primarily because it takes a generation or two for people to incubate and cultivate the idea of learning, developing, creating a market, creating a latent demand for a product, and commercializing that product. It's a mindset change. It not only is a function of education, it's a function of evolving evolving social ecosystems. 15, 20 years ago, people were shy of joining startups primarily because there were very limited success stories around. Parents would make the children aware of the fact that you might lose your job in few months while you might want to go and join an established business. Now, that necessarily kills all the opportunities for a startup to come into. More importantly, vocation-based, technology-based, infrastructure-based, growing talent pool is what creates a lack of, or rather creates hurdles and bottlenecks in startups. So I completely agree that it is about the policy, it is about funds, but more importantly, it's about the people that build the entire ecosystem. And if you don't have that part of the ecosystem working, startups won't grow. Which is where one of the reasons why a lot of Middle Eastern businesses and Middle Eastern startups, especially in UAE and Qatar, have been successful, is because of that mindset change in the last 20 years.
Okay, what would you say is directly responsible for this mindset change? Is education enough? Is
So
what really is responsible to make this change?
education plus a little bit about ability to take risks and ability to democratize services. It's also a function of what sector are you in. If I'm sitting in India and I'm talking about deep space tech startups, then I'll be fooling myself. But if I'm building startups which are more relevant for the geography and which are more imbibe into the ecosystem of a geography, or if I'm sitting in the Middle East and I'm talking about socially built or health tech, fintech, edutech startups, then I would see a relevance and a market for myself here. So it's also about being a right fit into a right geography with the right talent pool.
Great, great. Francis, what do you think about this? The feedback from our panelists. Do you think that government policies like Kartik said, people, policy, and funds is sufficient, or do you think something more is needed? And what's your take?
I actually agree with everyone's points. It's very exact, and I would say that it's also what we're also lacking here in the Philippines. But what I would like to add is actually the inspirational stories. You know, the stories of founders getting exits, and the success stories that we can share to others so that they can be inspired to do their own startups. I think that's what's missing here. We're still in the early infancies of startup ecosystem, and we're still building the success stories as of today. And we're hoping that that would create a new wave of entrepreneurs who will start to join the startup movement and start their own startups.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Francis, let me direct this to you, this question to you again. We know that startups are there to solve real problems, especially in developing countries where poverty is a rife, health, food shortage, and all that. Now, what do you think that to see any Africa, let me say, any developing country to drop that status as being a developing country? What industries do you believe they should focus on realistically to bring actual development?
That's a very interesting question, and it's a good point. Actually, when the Philippine startup ecosystem was starting up, everything was pretty much a copycat of whatever was happening, in the U.S. and in Europe at the time. So nowadays, we start to see more localized, problems that startups are solving. So, for example, just to share with you, one of the companies I'm part of, what we do is we put up Wi-Fi in low-income communities because of these communities that are underserved or unserved, and they need internet connectivity. So there's a lot of challenging issues, not only in connectivity, probably clean energy, and you're looking at even energy, basic needs of people are also lacking, transportation. So that's why how Grab kind of took over the whole Southeast Asia because of our issues in transportation, and there could be more actually that are coming. What's very interesting is that these problems are very unique and is only happening in developing countries. And if they could scale well, they could pretty much conquer the other half of the world, which could be quite interesting.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. I mean, these are problems that you can't just copy models that succeeded in other regions and import them. It would pose a lot of challenges, and then you have to put a lot of factor, a lot of things in the host country and all that. And I think to a large extent, startups are beginning to realize that they need to solve real local problems. So I'm going to ask Pradita, what do you think, or what industries do you think developing countries in Indonesia, or especially a developing country like Indonesia, should focus on creating, like Kartik said earlier, talking about education, skill, manpower development. What do you think should happen over there?
Yeah, just to give you an overview, right? Most of the unicorns in Indonesia, they are all in the e-commerce sector. And right now, lots of investors in VC industry, they are thinking to have a vertical integration, meaning that they invest a lot in the logistics startups, and they invest a lot in, the payment, like Kartik said, right? In the fintech areas. And then I think that's for now, right? But as an investor, you must think for the long term, what will be the trend for the next 10 to 20 years from now. And I think for Indonesia, the trend for the next 10 to 15 years is about in AI sector, because right now in Indonesia, the lack
AI, you
of,
mean?
yeah, the artificial intelligence. Because from my observation, right, when I observe and analyze the trend in the much more developed countries, and I compare it to Indonesia, and then it sometimes it just like 10 years or like of 15 years from the developed country, even to China. And right now I'm also like becoming a GSD venture partner. So GSD is a bit like an incubator lab for the AI and the machine learning technology in Silicon Valley. So I help them to pick the best AI startups in Indonesia that they would like to go to the US to scale. So yeah, that's
Okay.
my answer. So yeah, there is a short term and the long term view on that.
Okay, great, great. The same question I'd like to pose to Vardana, and I'd like to, you are into deep tech and space tech, and I want to ask, is that what a developing country should, will it solve real problems for developing countries, this industry you are in, and how will it do so?
Yeah, of course. I mean, deep tech and any kind of tech will solve a lot of problems for developing countries, and India has adapted it really well. I have seen a digital transformation come up in India, especially in edutech, in AI, in robotics, in a lot of these sectors like fintech, agri-tech. So I think it's really going to, and India is adapting it very nicely, the digital transformation. There are a lot of startups that have gone to Silicon Valley, that a lot of startups, in fact, a lot of investors from Silicon Valley want to invest in India. So I think the mindset is totally changed, and it is a futuristic thing to go into deep tech, which India is already adapting. Even there are some blockchain startups in India that have already come up and are getting well funded.
Oh, that's great. That's great to know,
Yeah.
because I was going to ask that later on during the show. That do you think blockchain will help developing countries confront the challenges that they have? And you practically just gave me an answer on that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Actually, your voice is echoing a bit, so I was unable to hear it well. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
I think Shreya, I'll come to you. Do you agree with the rest of the panelists? I mean, the industries developing countries have to focus on to ensure that there is real sustainable development across generations.
I absolutely agree with the rest of the panelists. I think the advantage of being investors and startups in developing countries is the fact that the basic idea of a startup or innovation is the fact that necessity derives innovation, right? And for us, for developing nations, there is so much gap in what we have and what we want, that it is so easy for a startup or somebody to innovate, because we actually have basic problems that we need solution. Like as Francis mentioned, that he's working with a company that's providing internet access to underpenetrated
No God.
areas, and all these developing countries, whatever said and done, besides a couple of GCC countries, internet penetration rate is less than 50%, and being able to give digital access to all of these people, that is what 80% of our global population. I think that is why all these industries that kind of incorporate technology in the basic things we do, and connecting people from one region to the other is something that developing countries and startups basically in developing countries should be focusing at. And I think that's where their scalability will lie in the future, because solving real problems, solving problems that are pertinent to most of your demographic is the only thing that will make your product or your service successful. So yes, I believe fintech, health tech, agri tech are something that most of our developing nations that are net exporters to the rest of the world will need for ease of transaction, to ease of connecting ourselves, to be able to have more sustainable development in agriculture. So yeah, I believe that what the panelists are saying about investing and having more first-hand solutions in technology is something that startups in developing countries should be looking at.
Great, great. Well, you said it, and I'm sure most of the projects and startups you come across, you probably steer them in that direction, which is a wonderful thing. With all that everyone has said now, with the rate of development in developing countries, Kartik, do you think that anytime soon the tag of developing countries will be dropped from some of these country names. For example, India, the rate at which agri-tech, health tech, and all that is going, do you think that they will, maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, India will be called a developed country, and why do you think so?
So I look at it differently, and I'll answer this in two different parts. First is to what the panelists said on the previous question. I partly agree and I partly disagree. I think it's a demand supply equilibrium that drives what sectors would need to work. I might disagree with the fact that India at the moment is ready on deep tech and space tech for very simple reason. Government has just about opened up space and just about opened up defense as a sector, and we have seen. I have seen 27 startups from defense coming in for funding into some of our venture fund bases. So it's about A, first of all, it's about the government policies. B, I would agree to the fact that it's about the need of the hour that drives the growth of an ecosystem. But then one needs to understand that startups, especially at certain stages of the business, are not going to move a country from being a developed country, from an underdeveloped to a developing and a developing to a developed country. It's about how the entire ecosystem works and how the overall GDP or GDP per capita is driven. Startups would still, in developing countries, contribute to a very small and insignificant volume, considering that the real economy is what would be driving those businesses. However, the growth of startups would start bringing in dollars, would start bringing in foreign investments, would start bringing in FDIs, which would create multipliers at base, which would increase the GDP, and hence it might grow a business. But again, developing, developed, and underdeveloped tags are what were used by the World Bank in late 90s and early 80s. The world has already moved into a GDP per capita. India being in the top 5 GDP countries in the world doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a developed country. It might be a developing nation for all we care. But considering that it's ahead of a few countries in terms of its GDP, is a manifestation of the fact that the barometers have changed. What's important and what's interesting to know is startups would grow basis a pure demand supply equation in the business. Like defense, fintech is one space, e-commerce is one space, artificial intelligence is one space. Depending on how the ecosystem thrives and builds concentric layers of funding or concentric layers of businesses, startups would grow. So I would partly agree to what others said, and I would partly disagree.
Okay, great. I mean, it's balanced, and like you said, GDP of India is way above many other countries, but they still classify it as a developing country. And
until unless the criteria for considering a country as developing versus a developed is not purely basis the economic situation or the economic power. It's also about a lot of social indicators, human indicators, life expectancy, health indicators. So until unless all of them are taken care of and built, moving a country from a developing to a developed would be a long haul. So while I would put my money on startups as an industry, and I would still consider it to be a very, very buoyant ecosystem, I would weigh and watch as to whether they would be able to take it to the next level. More important is not about number of startups that come on the table. It's also about the successes of the startups. Because once the government opens up a startup and incubator fund, you would see a beeline at our doorsteps. But then it's also about how much do they bring to the table, how many of them actually convert. If it's a 1% conversion, then we are living in a very different world compared to a 7.5 to 12% conversions on startups that we see in certain established geographies. Again, not only the conversion, it's also the next level. Once you start taking the startups into a part of your mainstream ecosystem, it's about your capital appreciation. It's about your multiplier effect. Is your startup able to give you a 15x to 24x multiple in an X number of time? What is the kind of base? What is the kind of scale? And what is the kind of democratization that your startup does? That would define that has it solved your real world problem or has it just created a product for itself in the market? So I would weigh it a little differently.
Okay, cool. I mean, you said something important there to me that it's not just enough to just have a startup or many startups, but how do those startups translate to real growth and scale and you have so much impact on a region or economy. Francis, what do you think? Because I know that a significant number of startups in developing countries do not get past the first few years. Now, what is it that takes a startup from an idea stage to a sustainable stage? Because ideas are everywhere, but growth, sustainability is so important. What's your take on that?
I think that's the interesting thing right now. Given what's happening, in Silicon Valley with the whole WeWork, scandal. What's happening down here is that we're starting to see two paths for a startup to take. So one is where you do the traditional VC route, where you raise funds and you try to, get to the next level and raise funding, or you can go after profitability and be sustainable. So I think that's the interesting path for startups to take, is to be able to see if they could take the profitability route and then wait it out until VCs are able to invest, because we have very few investors down here who are willing to invest towards startups. So if there were investors who would start to come, then they could start to play the game. But at this point, most are trying to survive via cash flow. At least on that end, they can survive longer and wait it out.
So, how long do you think it takes a typical startup to start expecting revenue, profits? I mean, they are startups, so a year, 6 months, 2 years.
I think that's a challenge because there's a build up before you can actually get
Exactly.
significant revenues, right? And the issue is that since there is no funding available, they can't really risk too much because it's their own savings on the line. So what they're trying to do is trying to go for revenue first, develop as they go along, rather than develop everything at the start and then hope that they could actually sell something. So it's a bit different. What I like about it is a bit more realistic and sustainable in that sense, where people are starting to be more real about what they're doing, rather than if you're more VC funded, then you're kind of thinking about how do you go to the moon.
Yeah, yeah. Quickly before I hand over to my senior colleague Vadana, what is it about startups that makes a startup go beyond that tag of being a startup? What is it that makes them sustainable and see growth?
Well, there are lots of factors which makes a startup sustainable. It's the kind of technology they are building, what is the kind of revenue they have, what is the kind of team they have. It's very important to, have a very good team in a startup. So naturally, if these factors are not taken into consideration, the investments take a bit long. Also, I have seen companies at idea stage, the founders having a strong background. They have not even launched their technology, but they get funded because the founders background is strong and they know how to build that idea. So just having any idea doesn't work. It's also depends on what you're building and how to sustain it in the long run, having the right team. Like in my previous talks also, I have said that many people are skeptical to have a CTO, CFO in their company. They overlook that point, and hence, they fall back because they don't have the right kind of professional guidance which they are seeking.
I totally agree with you. Right team makes the team work, and it should not be understated. It should be put into context when building a startup. At this point, I'll hand over to my colleague, Sonny. Any
Yeah,
inputs, any
thank you.
feedback?
Thank you, Nathaniel, for that session. Really good questions coming from you, and I was really enjoying sitting back. I have got a question for all of us here. When it comes to developed countries like Singapore or Silicon Valley, the startups have access to so much information. They have access to so much people. They have access to so much investors, the co-working spaces, all that stuff, the mentoring and everything else. But when it comes to a small startup in an emerging market, for say, like, for example, Cambodia, or maybe a small remote village in India, they have fantastic idea. They have a fantastic product. They are obviously technically savvy as well to create that solution, but they don't have that connection. So what are VCs doing? How are these investors? How are these startups getting access to the VCs? So what have you seen so far? Let's start with Karthik.
Fantastic. So, Sunny, I think you're right about it. It's easy for people to get access to funds, and it's easy for VCs to find the right startup in a geography like Singapore and maybe Dubai for that matter. But the challenges for VCs, especially what we saw in the early 2005 to 2012, when India was a very nascent startup growing market, was people would necessarily only come up with ideas. They wouldn't even have an idea of how to prepare a pitch deck, which means you need to create and curate the idea and cultivate the idea to an enterprise. An idea to an enterprise is a journey that a VC needs to co-mentor, which means you not only need to help them get their financials in place, you need to make sure that you help them risk mitigate the business, you need to man the business for them, you need to chart a success story for them, you need to, and over the period of years, VCs have become smart enough to create an entire incubation ecosystem, which necessarily means today, when somebody comes to me with a business proposal, I tell them, you just come in with an idea. I have the entire working ecosystem. I have investors with me. I have technology with me. I have people with me. I have mentors with me. Come in with your idea and let's co-create. The desire to co-create is something that VCs need to be ready with. And more importantly, VC's own risk appetite and VC's own ability to mitigate his risk has to be significantly high, because while you would be able to invest your dollars into a startup, there's no way that you'd be able to guarantee a significant return or guarantee a significant multiplier till the startup learns to go through the whole 9 yards of the journey. More often than not, startups in 2005 to 2012, when I was a part of a early e-commerce ecosystem in India, out of every 100 companies that went online or or started building businesses, not more than 2 to 3 succeeded, which is where your failure rates were significantly high. So you need to be ready to take that much risk. You need to be ready to mitigate your business and still support and consolidate the businesses that have succeeded. So it's a very different mindset that VCs need to come in with in developing countries.
Right. Sure. Great points, Karthik. Pradita, I just have to ask you this question. Coming from Indonesia, and obviously you help incorporate the companies in Singapore, which is obviously we know why for the obvious reasons. But still, when in Indonesia, still it's not as developed as Singapore as a market. If you see that the Singapore is a very thriving and startup ecosystem. A lot of money gets pumped into startups, developing them. So what kind of challenges have you seen representing Indonesia, and what challenges has the startups faced being in Indonesia that you can share with our audience today? Thank you.
Yeah, I think for kind of challenge, yeah, as I mentioned previously, that the human capital is still a challenge. And then previously, when we have been hit by the COVID-19, right, I encourage all my portfolio companies to just, to just thinking out loud. For example, that if they need to pivot their business model, they shouldn't afraid to do that. I mean, as a startup, you need to be dynamic, and then you need to be, very, very flexible in terms of the business model, especially when the COVID-19 hits. Along the way, I also teach all these, and encourage all these portfolio companies in Indonesia to be mindful about their cash runway. And I would like to also advise them to, they should have at least 1.5 years in runway for their working capital and everything. And sometimes as a startups, and then sometimes the big startups that got a lot of funding there, the burn rate is very, very high, and they don't even care about the bottom line, right? About always about GMV and the top line. But I think moving further, given this COVID-19 and all these challenges in Indonesia, we need to be mindful about, being sustainable and then being profitable at the same time. So not only prioritize growth, but also thinking that investor also would like to see their startups to, to get into space. And then, for example, in my fund, I usually invest in IRR more than 58% for 5 years. And we also encourage the startups to, to be 10 times around 5 years, and, having a very ambitious goals, even though we are in the developing countries. And right now, lots of channels like Google, lots of internet, YouTube, and then it's becoming a borderless world. Even though you are in the developing country, you can still you can still like learn from all the website, and then you can just still learn how to build your financial models instead of coming to the thesis and knowing nothing about the financial models.
Right. Thank you, Pradipta. Sorry, Vandana. So, okay, we have this internet, we have the internet world is open world, and the startups in every country has access to all the data and information. But when it comes to connection, when it comes to reaching out to Silicon Valley, for example, a startup in India or Indonesia or Cambodia or Africa, they want to reach out to somebody in Silicon Valley, for example, say, how would they do that? I mean, is that a channel? I mean, probably the VCs in Silicon Valley probably getting like we don't know how many requests or emails per day, and it's very difficult for them to
I
attend to
think
these kind of startups. Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I
Sorry.
think as a venture capitalist and in Indonesia, for example, I position myself to be the bridge, right? To be the license, because I'm fortunate to have much more channels to much more better developed countries, and then I think we should utilize that to bridge this to close the gap, right? And then as a venture capitalist, you don't only act as a passive investors, but also an active investors as a networkers that connect these two, to close the gap.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I think that's all of us here, all the panelists here. I think we should have that kind of mindset, right? To just
Absolutely. That
connect
startup
yeah,
go global should be the final goal of any
exactly,
startup. Thank you.
exactly.
Vandana, your insights.
Yeah, so definitely, firstly, I would recommend all the audiences to go to panels like these, get engaged more on LATOKEN TV, and they'll get to, reach Silicon Valley really, really fast, because we are the bridges here and we can help you get connected. We are the right professional set of people here, that can help you connect to the Silicon Valley very easily, and everybody should reach out to us. So I think getting more and more on these kind of webinars and on connecting with us on LinkedIn and our websites and reaching out to us, we can create that bridge and help you reach wherever you want. And we are all can get global by just using these platforms very, very easily. So I think that's the best way to reach out to everybody.
Thank you, Vandana. Shreya, over to you. We have emerging markets. Then we have women who do not have access to many things, as you rightly know. So, how do you ensure that a woman-led startup, per se, very ambitious startup, and but a lot of hurdles on the way? How do you help these startups, women-led startup? Because we don't women usually are not taken very seriously when it comes to, especially the remote places of the country I'm talking about, very remote places. So how do you make sure these people actually go out and showcase their talent, their product and solution? Thank you.
So I think I've mentioned this on the LATOKEN platform that we are right now a woman-led and an all-women team here at Venture Gurukul as well. So we are all about women empowerment, and although yes, we can say this, that women are not taken seriously, but it's the whole point is that as Karthik has mentioned time and again, that you need to be able to have the appetite to take the risk, right? So the moment this particular woman entrepreneur steps out of her comfort zone, steps out of her remote area, and tries to just make an impact on whatever personal problem that she's tried to solve, or a social problem or a socio-economic problem that she's tried to solve, the moment women like ourselves and women across the globe, once they step out, they, even if they were not taken seriously inside their homes or at their workplaces, they will be taken seriously by some other person, not necessarily like women investors like us, but even male investors or just investors overall. So I believe that stepping out of your comfort zone and being able to send cold emails, being able to try and find the best way of access. I know it's limited in developing countries and especially in India, but participating as much as you can in platforms like LATOKEN, or attending webinars that, the government of India or other investor platforms, kind of do. And that's where you will get traction somewhere, and there will be somebody out of this 1.7 billion people we have in India to
Yeah.
lend you an ear. And I'm sure there are VCs, there are a lot of women-led VCs that focus on women entrepreneurs, and they are more than happy to help you, and so are we. And I think that's where women need to be. I would like I keep on saying to entrepreneurs that I meet, that as long as you are ready to push boundaries, as long as you're ready to make an impact, and you are persistent about it, it doesn't matter what gender, what caste, or what social strata you come from. It's your idea that will take you leaps and bounds ahead. And I think we like to stick to that thesis.
Yeah, sure. Great. Thank you, Shreya. Thank you. Very empowering as well, being a woman.
Thank you.
Great insights. So yes, anybody, Francis, you just messaged me. You want to share something about from a Philippines perspective? How do you help startups and entrepreneurs go global? Very quickly.
Sure. So on my end, what I've been doing is, been helping out, mentoring in all these accelerators and incubators. At the same time, I started the first tech conference in the Philippines back then, where we featured the local tech talents as well as the startups that we have here. It was pretty tough back then because you had to travel to Singapore just to showcase your startup. So that's one thing that we did here. At the same time, I think we have to go one step further, which is, I think, most of the investors here must transition towards a venture builder model, where it has to help further on developing startups and the talents and the concepts within. Because I think most of the education here are tilting towards employment, and most of them are not particularly knowledgeable in terms of how do they run their startup. So I think one thing to do is to handhold the startups here and to help them out as they go along with their journey.
Perfect. So do VCs, I'm just asking this open question, do VCs, venture capitals, private investors, do they have their community where they collaborate and shake hands with other regions? Do they do that and fund and invest into a startup? Have you seen any case stories? Anybody can share any? Do they, like Singapore, Philippines, Southeast Asia coming together, the VCs?
Yeah, definitely. I have done a fintech startup where a Singapore fund has invested, a UK fund has invested, and some Indian funds have together co-invested. So a lot of these things happen, and co-investments happen from different countries. So it's very readily acceptable everywhere.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for the insights today. Nathaniel, do you have anything else to say, or else we take closing remarks?
Basically, just a lot of information to process, and I really appreciate all the feedback. I just have one question, and I'm trying to follow the trend in the globally now. I'm trying to find out what do you think the role blockchain has to play in the role of developing countries? Do you think it has a significant role, and and how is the best way to implement blockchain in developing countries, in technologies, in different stuff? Yeah. Shreya, do you have any insights on that? How blockchain can impact developing the growth of developing countries, and do you think it is a significant technology to bring about accelerated change?
I think when it comes to AI and blockchain, I think developing countries, I can speak for India and a couple of Southeast Asian countries. I think we are at a nascent stage with our tech, and eventually, yes, maybe 5-6 years down the line, once we have the standard base tech developed, blockchain and AI can probably accelerate our growth. But right now, being able to answer create basic solutions using tech is something that we should be focusing on. We come from emerging economies, and I would like to not call us developing, but call us fast growth countries here. So I think being able to bring our tech to the standards of what Silicon Valley was doing when we were still trying to grapple on to technology. So I believe that once we've reached that stage, once our tech and once our digital penetration has come to the point, then maybe yes, deep tech, AI, and blockchain can help us, create barriers and create a more sustainable tech post that. But right now, I believe we need to focus on just developing strong tech that answers the questions that are pertinent to our geographies and answer local problems. So
Okay.
yeah,
I agree. Okay.
blockchain.
Excellent. Kartik, what's your take on that?
I think I would second what Shreya said. While I wouldn't deny the fact that blockchain can have a massive impact in supply chain, in warehousing solutions, in fintech, in health tech primarily, in trying to democratize health tech across a much needed large geography like India. The challenge is that venture funds and businesses need to understand that VC investments and startup is not about a fancy AI, VR, is AI or AR. I mean AR, VR, or a blockchain infused business, but it's also about solving problems that a business faces or a geography faces. I would rather invest the dollar at this time in democratizing education and health tech in a developing country, because that's what it needs. And that's where the multiplier is coming in. And I specifically spoke to Sonny about it last time around. A $2 an hour education startup today for me in certain parts of Africa and Pakistan is delivering a much bigger multiplier than what a $12 to $15 an hour education startup has delivered anywhere in the Western world. So that's the need of the hour. Bottom of the pyramid is where we need to start focusing, and we need to start making sure that the startup has a much bigger reach: water, lifestyle, food, education, health, transportation, civic society, social structures, safety, and cybersecurity is where we would need to park the dollars for at least for the first few years, to make sure the real economy grows. Because that's how the economy would grow. Unless you power the economy from the bottom, AI, ML, and maybe AR, VR, and blockchain would be an icing on the cake. But icing on the cake is not going to move the needle anywhere. It's just going to make it look beautiful.
Okay. Nice. You made a valid point. Maybe as you thought that, maybe just give us some roundup, closing remarks as we come to the end of the show.
It's absolute pleasure to see you guys around every second day or third day. Very happy to meet you. And more importantly, as a sector, I stay heavily invested and bullish, extremely bullish about emerging geographies and developing nations, primarily because they come up with a lot of talent, they come up with a lot of enthusiasm, and more importantly, they come up with a lot of eagerness and hunger to grow and succeed, because they grow from the bottom of the pyramid. And that is where the money needs to be parked at the moment. Thank you so much.
Great. Pradita, quickly, closing remarks, and what's your take on the entire topic?
Yeah, I think for all the investors globally, right, like these emerging markets or like fast growing economy like Indonesia and India, there will be like, the next China. And I think it's very important if you just invest it right now and then you get the multiplier and, the distribution paid in capital back in much more larger level. That's the attraction for the global investors.
Super, great. Thank you very much, Francis. And before I come to Francis Pradita, I hope to see you next time. You've been a wonderful guest.
Okay.
Yeah. Francis, your take and your closing remarks.
Sure. I think
blockchain has a future and for developing countries. What do you? Yeah.
Sure. Actually, blockchain would have a lot of use down here in the Philippines, where internet connectivity is such a big issue. Imagine blockchain is able to, do a lot of the solutions that you would normally need internet for, let's say e-wallets and the likes, and do that offline by simply using blockchain technology, decentralizing, and using everyone's devices to be able to create a network. I think that's the critical role right now that we're seeing from startups that are coming over. A lot of foreign blockchain startups are actually coming over to try their solutions down here because of that unique problem that we have.
Super. Thank you for your feedback. Excellent insights. I hope the viewers learned from that. Vardana, what do you think blockchain has to offer for developing countries, and your closing remarks?
Yeah, blockchain has to offer a lot to developing countries. There are a lot of investments happening in India in this space, and there are a lot of startups that I'm seeing in this space and taking them to all over the world for investments. And, my closing remarks are that, thank you, Sunny, and thank you to yourself for, making this platform and connecting the dots all over the world and making everybody go global and trying to help a lot of the ecosystem. So I would highly recommend everybody to come on this platform and, connect with us. We are heavily investing in fintech, agri-tech, edutech, AI, robotics, and quantum computing as well.
Super. Thank you very, very much. Our viewers will learn from that and take that home. And obviously, we hope to see you very, very, very soon again. Shreya, what do you think blockchain has to offer developing? I think you gave some insight on that, but
Yeah.
your closing
Already
remarks.
done. Thank you so much. And thank you, Nathan. So again, my show is coming up in 30 minutes. It's about health tech. Do tune in, viewers. And again, investor speakers. I'm going to see you on another panel. Startups, entrepreneurs, what are you waiting for? Come on this platform and pitch. Thank you for watching. I'll see you soon. Take